Okay, I will start straight away without further delay. I hope you got an opportunity to go through the notes of chapter number 1. You probably even downloaded the MP3. You can keep it as a backup, maybe for reference in the future, just in case these voice notes get lost. Uh, it will be interesting if you do your personal study, because just going through a study for the sake of going through it is not going to help unless we learn the scriptures and see how we can apply it in our lives. Any Bible study is useless, and you will really not study unless you sit down with a paper and pen and uh, really make a list of things that you have learned and create a graphic which your brain will process and store. So kindly do some hard work. This applies not just to this current Bible study, this applies to any study you will do at any point of time. Okay, so chapter number 1 surely brings the conclusion to the entire book of Ecclesiastes by saying that everything under the sun is vanity. And he, the critic inside the book, draws out several arguments to prove his point about three major factors that he will continue to raise in every chapter of this book. The three filters that you have to remember even today when we are considering what he is doing in each of these chapters. His perspective will come from and come through these three filters: the filter of time, the filter of death, and the filter of randomness. March of time, certainty of death, and the randomness of life. Now, he says that when we put everything under the sun through these three filters of time, death, and randomness, everything just becomes hevel, zero, vapor, smoke. Now, when we come to the end of this chapter number 1, we can see that Solomon actually commits himself to finding meaning and fulfillment through wisdom. That is verse number 17 of chapter number 1. I set my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this also is grasping for the wind. For in much wisdom is much grief, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. So he commits himself to understanding meaning and fulfillment through wisdom. Now that is where we will start our today's lesson. So let's get into today's study. Solomon ends up chapter 1 by saying that even wisdom is like grasping for the wind. We see him ending by saying that he had to increase his knowledge, which instead only increased his sorrow. He found that meaningless, like a chasing of the wind. But what I want you to remember when we look through chapter number 2 is, though he concluded that wisdom is vanity, he does not abandon wisdom. Now, this is a very important thing to consider, because often, even while I was talking to you in the last 2 days, many of you said that if this is vanity, should we have it? Let's look at wisdom itself today. Wisdom is not abandoned. Though he says that it is vanity, the critic did not abandon wisdom, though it brought him sorrow and accounted for vanity. When we read chapter 2, verse number 3, he says that I was guided by wisdom. So though it was vanity, he continued to use wisdom to be guided. If you read chapter number 2, verse 9, he says that while I accumulated great wealth and did great works, my wisdom remained with me. So while he was doing what he was doing, he did not abandon wisdom, though he concluded that wisdom is vanity. When we go to verses 12 to 16, you will see that he goes on a tangent in the middle of today's chapter. He gives us the reason why he chose wisdom, why he did not abandon it, though it was vanity. He chose wisdom because wisdom was better than folly. That's it. Though wisdom doesn't help us gain much, but at least if we have wisdom, we will not walk in darkness. At least we will know what we are doing and what to expect. Our life will not be full of surprises. Wisdom will give us light. Wisdom will give us the ability to anticipate and expect, and it will remove the element of shock and even the possibility of loss and hurt. That's the only reason. So, though it is vanity, he doesn't abandon wisdom, because if he abandons wisdom, he is only left with folly, foolishness, and that is like walking in the dark. So, he doesn't abandon wisdom, he keeps wisdom with him. But if you read verses 14, 15, and 16, chapter number 2, he again concludes that wisdom is vanity. Because he says, see, he brings in the filter of death. He says, wisdom or folly, light or darkness, one fate waits everything, and that is death. So, having lived wisely or foolishly matters in the short run, but not ultimately, because death swallows all. Death makes everything heaven. So, why I am saying this is, in the same way, whatever we will conclude in the whole book of Ecclesiastes as vanity is not to be thrown away and abandoned forever. Just because it is vanity doesn't mean that it is not useful in our lives. If we continue to do that, we will have to leave everything, climb up a mountain, and become an ascetic. When the critic says it is vanity, he is only letting us know that those things which are under consideration by itself or by themselves add up to nothing. Wisdom cannot be the main thing in life. Whatever we consider cannot be the main thing in life. The pursuit of our life should not be wisdom or anything of that sort. Now let us consider verse number 1 of chapter number 2. The critic says, I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with mirth, therefore enjoy pleasure, but surely this also was vanity. I don't know which version you are using. But when we read verse number 1, it seems like the next thing that Solomon or the critic considers or chooses to test is pleasure and amusement. The words mirth, enjoy, pleasure, they all indicate that that's the next thing he's going to consider. However, if you read the entire chapter, you will see that it is not actually pleasure that he is considering. He is considering riches. Yes, he is now considering money. And not just money which he has inherited, money earned by hard work, by hard labor, riches that he has accumulated by hard work. And while he considers riches, he is going to consider the things that riches can buy. If you have money in your hand, what are the things that money will make available for us? That is what he is going to consider in chapter number 2. So, broadly speaking, he is going to consider 3 things. I'll just say that first and then we will go into it. So, what are the things that riches make available for us? Number 1, fun and pleasure. You can note it down. Number 1, fun and pleasure. Number 2, work and projects. And number 3, possessions. There is a 4th item. You can just write number 4 and leave it blank. I will come back to it later. So, number 1, fun and pleasure. Number 2, works and projects. Number 3, possessions. Now, before we go into the 3 points, I want you to come back to verse number 1 and read it again. How does it start? It says, I said in my heart, come now, I will test you. Wait a minute. We thought that he was going to test riches. He had just finished testing wisdom and he's supposed to test riches. Then why is he saying in his heart, come now, I will test you? As if he is going to test his heart. Remember, there is nothing left to be tested about anything that we will ever consider in our lives. There is nothing left to be tested about what the critic was going to test. Can we test wisdom? Can we test riches? Can we test pleasure or fame? And then proclaim a result that will have any implication on wisdom, or an implication on riches, or an implication on pleasure? After we test these things, whatever be a result, the result of our test will not affect those things. So if a result does not affect a thing that is tested, then it is not tested. When we test something, it has to pass or fail. If we say that wisdom has failed the test, will it change anything in all of history? Will it do anything to wisdom? Will it do anything to riches? No. But in the process of the testing, we will surely be affected. When we test wisdom or riches or pleasure or fame or anything, those things will not be affected. We will be affected. So we need to constantly consider that everything we try out in this world is going to affect us. We have to keep checking. What are these things doing to our hearts? What is wisdom going to do to our hearts? What is riches going to do to our hearts? We are always the test object. These things are never tested. They are time tested. They are what they are. We are the subjects. We will be tested all the time. We have to look at our hearts time and again. And what these things do to our heart is utterly crucial. Are we becoming harder or softer? Are we becoming selfish or generous? Are we becoming rude or compassionate? Are we becoming callous or sensitive? It is our hearts that are tested every time. And it's based on what happens to our hearts that we should come to any conclusions. I'm now going to talk about the first on the list that I told you, fun and pleasure that riches buy. Verse number 1. Now, we do not just want money for money. We want money for what money can get for us. The very first thing we think of with money in our hands, if you get a 5,000 rupee or a 10,000 rupee, what is the first thought that comes to your mind? In normal times, I mean the non-COVID times, before coronavirus hit us, if I were to tell you that you will get ₹1,000,000, I don't think any of you will think of depositing all of it in the bank. Maybe a small portion of it you will set apart and make an FD or put in mutual funds. But the bulk of it will go into buying stuff that will give you more fun and pleasure. It could be a bigger TV, a better phone, or a lot of stuff that are on your waiting list which you have created while window shopping. A bulk of the money will also go in eating out, watching movies, doing fun stuff, and perhaps even a trip or two. I mean, I'm talking again about before the coronavirus. The first thing that we think of with money in our hands is to have fun and derive as much pleasure as we can with it. Mauj masti, is the first thing that comes to our mind. That is the perspective with which verse 10, Solomon says that he did not withhold anything that his eyes desired or the joy that his heart yearned for. He gave it all because he could afford it. Money gives us the power to give to our eyes and to our heart whatever they yearn for or desire. And as soon as we have money, look at the poor laborer, as soon as he gets money, he goes crazy and he does things that give him fun and pleasure. The alcoholic, he gets fun, he gets money, he goes and drinks all the money. That's the first thought that comes, So that's the first thing that the critic discusses when he discusses riches. Now, it is very interesting the way he has structured chapter 2. Inside the topic of pleasure, there are three more things. He is considering three more things inside the topic of fun and pleasure. So those sub-points are: number 1, laughter; number 2, fun and merriment or amusement; number 3, wine and folly. So I repeat: number 1, laughter; number 2, fun and merriment or amusement; number 3, wine and folly. So this is in the first main point: fun and pleasure that riches buy. Now I am going to talk about sub-point 1 of point number 1. So that is laughter. Remember, we are talking about pleasures that riches can buy. One of the first things that riches can buy is laughter. Now, as a group of friends in the church, we look for every opportunity to get together and have times of laughter. And when we get together, many times we can see people rolling on the floor in laughter. Now, that is something that any friend will do. But remember, riches make it possible for us to make more opportunities for laughter and fun. One of the pleasures that man has is to just laugh at something. Now, how does riches make it possible? If you have money in your hands, you will arrange parties, kitty parties. You will get together, play games. What's that game? What is it called? The housey. Or go on picnics, etc. But people get together and laugh about things. Gathering people together is not cheap. It means money. And if you have money in your hands, you can get people together and then get one of the most important aspects of pleasure, and that is laughter. What is the critic's conclusion about laughter that riches make possible? You know what he says? He says it is madness. If you are spending money, if your chief goal is to laugh and laugh out loud, if your main purpose is to have some time of over the roof laughter without having real reasons, I say real reasons to smile. Your life doesn't have real reasons to smile, but you are out there laughing out loud and rolling on the floor. This is madness. Think about the dozens of comedy shows that have bloomed in the recent times. People buy costly tickets to go and laugh. And the comedians come up with some really good stuff too. I listen to a lot of them and I really wonder how they think, how they make up these comedies. And the audience goes mad with laughter too. But think of this, when the event is over and the people go back home, they come back to the real situations, which may be the family fights, bitterness, anxiety, sadness, worries, jealousy, struggles. All these issues are very real in their lives, like live wire. But out there in the comedy show, they were all laughing without worrying about what these things will really do to them. Solomon says, this is madness. If you use money to get the pleasure called laughter, it is madness. It is vanity. Now I'm coming to the second sub point of point number 1. Pleasures that riches can buy. The second thing on that list is fun and amusement. Sometimes it is not laughter, it is just the good times we have. We may not be having laughter riots, but we may be simply having fun. We may be enjoying a long ride on a highway, or chilling out with friends at a coffee shop, or go on a trip with friends to a picnic or a tourist spot, go out and eat with friends, play some games together. There's no laughter riot happening there, but it's just fun. All this is fun. And again, riches can buy us a lot of fun, because all these activities are not cheap. You have money, you will think of all this. Now again, what is the critic's conclusion? He says that these things make us happy while there may be no real joy inside. So we are having fun, but again, what is your real condition? So his way of coming back at fun and merriment and amusement is, he says, what good does it do? You can have fun for a while, you can while away your time, then what? For some time you have forgotten that you have problems in your life. You had fun because you were with people and you were doing certain things. And just because you had money, think about a beggar on the street, can you think of that? Think of a poor man, can you think of this? No, riches make this possible. After this is done, you go back to your lonely, undealt stuff and the situation from which you were running away in the first place. What good does it do? This fun is also called amusement, it's really amusing. The word amusement comes from amuse. Amuse comes from the word muse. Muse means think. Amuse means stop thinking. Any amusement park is a place where we go to stop thinking. We have problems and real issues in our lives, and we want to get a break from this. We want to stop thinking about the real issues. So we go to amusement park. Any activity that makes us stop thinking about reality and makes us enjoy is amusement. But what good does it do? He leaves us with that question. Fun and good times as a pleasure is no good. It is vanity. Now I am going to the third sub point of point number 1. Pleasures that riches can buy. The third sub point is wine and folly. Verse number 3 says, I searched in my heart how to gratify my flesh with wine. It says that he cheered his flesh with wine. Now what is interesting to note as you read the whole of the chapter is that the word folly appears where the word wine has been put. Folly is foolishness. Why is folly mentioned along with wine? Because wine makes a fool out of a man. A man drunk behaves like a fool. From the first sip, he starts slipping towards foolishness. How foolish he becomes depends on how drunk he gets. So wine and foolishness go together. If you start drinking wine, you have already started slipping towards foolishness, is what critic says. The critic has tried hard drinks. He has got drunk on wine. However, the critic didn't completely abandon wisdom while cheering up his flesh with the wine. That is very interesting to note. He said that while guarding my heart with wisdom, how to lay hold on folly, which means he was very particular that when he drank wine, he only went to the edge of foolishness. He was wise enough all the time to only allow himself light, frivolous activities which were at the edge of foolishness, So, light foolishness, playing the fool. Because he didn't want to get into foolishness, because foolishness is darkness. Interesting, isn't it? So, he tried wine, and the little foolishness that comes with wine, he tried it, thinking that when people become rich, they start drinking. Why? It must be giving some pleasure. All the rich people in the world, they really enjoy drinking. It must be giving some pleasure. And that's why he wanted to try it. He wanted to see if there is any good in it. Now, what is his conclusion? He doesn't even feel worth mentioning what that resulted in. Drinking wine is not even in contention. Think about this. If pure laughter and fun did not pass the test, getting drunk for pleasure wouldn't qualify at all, considering the damage that it can cause, and in fact it does cause in majority of cases, to our health, to lives, to families, to finances, and to society at large. The critic does not even think it worthy enough to comment on what pleasure wine gives. Okay, let me come to the second thing that money can bring into our lives. Works that riches allow. After fun and pleasure, the critic chose to turn to the projects and the works that riches allow. If you read verses 4, 5, and 6, you can see a list of things he talks about, a variety of projects. He starts off by saying, great works. This could be architectural works like canals, fortresses, bridges, etc. Then he said he built houses. Then he said he planted vineyards. Then he talks about gardens. Then he talks about parks or orchards with fruit trees. Then he talks about pools of water, large enough to water a forest, not a swimming pool where 20 people can swim. Pools of water large enough to water a forest. These are the works that the critic or Solomon got engaged in. The list of things included gives you an idea that a lot of money was involved. Everything was king size. This is the thing that he is going to now evaluate. But we will come to the conclusion later on. These are the works that riches allow. The third thing that we are considering today under riches is the possessions that riches allow. Verses 7, 8 and 9. He says that he had servants and maidens. And then he says that there were servants who were born in his house, which means these servants were with families and they stayed with him for a long time. He had great possessions of great and small cattle. He gathered silver and gold. He had peculiar treasure of kings and of provinces. Now, this could mean treasures other than silver and gold, like antique items, or paintings or stuff of legend, or it could also mean taxes and tributes. Then he said he had personal entertainers. men and women singers. And then he also possessed musical instruments of all sorts. Now, there is an argument there that when he talks about musical instruments, it could also mean wives and concubines in the translation. But we will stick to musical instruments of all sorts. So, these are things that he has now bought with his riches. What all can you buy with your riches? That is what he has listed down there. Never forget that when I talked about riches, be it his possessions or be it his works, he gathered all these by hard work and wisdom. Now, verse number 9, when you go to verse number 9, he says that he was not a spoiled brat flourishing on the wealth that his dad left behind for him. He became great and also increased more. His wisdom was always with him. So he was not haphazard and impulsive, but he did things wisely and strategically. We hear stories of many people around us who get wealthy, and then the wealth gets into their head, and then they start splurging and living a lifestyle that becomes unsustainable, and finally they end up bankrupt and without anything. So why I listed the works and possessions as he has listed out in chapter number 2 is to help us to understand that who is this critic. He is not just the king. He is a king who has done great works. He is a king who has had great possessions. And he has listed out his works and his possessions. And after reaching there, he is making his conclusions. When a Ratan Tata or an Ambani speaks, people listen because he is reached somewhere and he is talking from that perspective. So never underestimate the critic as some old man who has got tired of life. He has achieved great things and he has never let wisdom go away from him, and then he is talking. Now simultaneously, when we read from verses 4 to 9, there is another interesting thing that he keeps repeating. He says that he did all these things for himself. He did it for his own pleasure and fulfillment. He didn't do it because others told him to. He didn't do it because he was expected as a king to do it. He did it for himself. That's why it says, I made my works great. I built myself. I made myself. I acquired male and female. I gathered for myself. I acquired and did this and did that. It was all for me. Usually when we do things for ourselves, except when we are cooking, it is usually the best. Let me give an example. If we were to build a house for ourselves, and when we had enough money for it, will we compromise in building that house? So this critic, he got the best in all the possessions. So it is not just that he did works and possessed things. Whatever he did the best. Whatever he acquired, he got the best. He found out which are the best musical instruments to buy, which are the best singers in the whole region, what are the best gold and silver available, which are the best cattle, which are the best servants, what is the best design of a house, how can we have the most yielding vineyards, how can we plant orchards with the most fruits, how can water be harvested to water a forest. He looked at the best. Now verse number 10 is interesting. Whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I did not withhold my heart from my pleasure. Now come to the last part. It says, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my reward from all my labor. Remember, I left a fourth point which was blank. It is now you have to fill. Pleasure that comes from reward of hard work. When you work hard and there is a result of that hard work, it gives you a pleasure. It makes you happy. So competing for space with the pleasures that we talked about earlier, which are they? Laughter, fun and amusement, wine and folly is the fourth point. The pleasure that comes from the reward of hard work. It's a rightful reward for all the labor and hard work we do. The critic's heart rejoiced in all his hard works. He found pleasure in it. When he was going through that labor, it made him rejoice. So now he has put before us three major things: pleasure, works and projects, and possessions. For the point of pleasure, he has already made his conclusions. Pleasure means laughter, madness. Pleasure means fun and amusement, what good it can do. Pleasure means wine and folly, no comments. Then he listed out all his works and all his possessions. Now he has not concluded on that. So we will go into the conclusion of that. But let's go to verse 11. Let's see what he says there. Then I looked on at all the works of my hands had done, and all the labor in which I had toiled, and indeed all was vanity and grasping for the wind. There was no profit under the sun. Now what I want you to think about there is, he says that I looked on all the works that my hands had done. So he is taking time for a hindsight to really assess all the works that his hands had created. So when he was doing it, he was rejoicing. That's how it is. When we do things, it is fun, it is engaging, it is we are busy, we have no time for anything, and whatever enjoyment is there, we take it. The stress also comes along, but then yes, we enjoy it. But once it is done, it is over, we usually tend to move on. He looks back and he considers all things that he had done. But he looked back at them, also the efforts that he had put in. He could only come to one conclusion: Hevel, vapor. And he adds a term: all this are a vexation of the spirit, unnecessary trouble. Now, how does he come to that conclusion? He has highlighted it when we look below. I'll come to that. We will be skipping verses 12 to 17 because we have dealt with it earlier, when in the beginning we said that why Solomon decided to choose wisdom. Why did he not abandon wisdom? So we have considered verses 12 to 17 in that section. So we will jump those verses and come straight away to verses 18 to 23. He lays down the real conclusions of seeking riches. He is now talking about his works and possessions. He says that as for works and possessions that he achieved by his hard work and the riches that he earned, the biggest turn-offs were in verses 18 to 21. So there were two things that really put him off. He really enjoyed what he had done and all the possessions he had, but when he looked back and assessed it, he had two big letdowns. Verses 18 to 21, when we read, we see that he said that I will have to leave it for someone else who hasn't worked for it, irrespective of the fact that I have applied wisdom, knowledge and skill into it. I will have to leave it for someone else, and no one knows who that person will be and what kind of person will that be. The fact that he looked at his works, his possessions, his money, and then he thought about this: my God, tonight if I die, who will this house go to? Who will take care? Now remember, he's a king. No, it is not small possessions and little works. He may have several sons and they may have fighting, and you know what happened to the kingdom later on. He had all this, but his sons and his generations, they floundered it, and for 2000 years the nation of Israel was not even on the map of the earth. So he's saying that I have done all this, I put wisdom and knowledge and skill into it, but will my children or whoever comes after me, will they take care of it? Then he says in verses 22 to 23, which is the second let down, he can't keep these things with him forever. He says that my body endured physical aches and my mind went through the troubles of thousands of thoughts, tensions, stresses. And at the end of that, what? He cannot keep these things with him. So he has achieved great projects and has had great possessions. But these are two letdowns. Now, when I talk about these things, you may say, oh, we already know this. But what we need to appreciate is that he has gone through the whole process in a systematic manner, and he is trying to consider every aspect of human life and what all we can achieve in this life. And then he is trying to make a calculated, well analyzed assessment and then a conclusion of it. So chapter 2, he was considering riches, and under riches considering three major things: pleasure, works and possessions. Some of the things I am saying are repetitive, but it's just so that you get the whole picture in your mind. He concluded about pleasure, laughter as madness, fun and amusement as what good it can do, and wine and folly as silence. Then he talks about works and possessions, and then he says that both these things, though have given me pleasure while I was doing it, it actually makes me sad when I think of it, because I will have to leave it for someone else. And actually, after having gone through all that physical labor and mental stress, if I cannot keep these things for myself, are they truly mine? Are they truly an achievement or a possession that I can be happy about? Is it going to give me fulfillment? He says no, because I'm not going to keep it anyways. So meaning of life and fulfillment cannot be found in riches, is what he is concluding. Now I need to take you to verse number 24 and 25. I am coming to the conclusion of the Bible study. Verse number 24 and 25, he says that nothing is better for a man than that he should eat and drink, and that his soul should enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw was from the hand of God. He says that what you eat and drink today and enjoy from your work are the only things that are actually belonging to you. Even if you have ₹1 million in your bank account, today, what actually give you a sense of I got it, that I really possessed it, like this is truly mine, is only the food you ate, the drinks you drank, and the joy you got from whatever work you did today. These are the only true possessions in your hand today. You may say that no, I have ₹1 million in my bank account. But will you wake up tomorrow? We don't know. There is no guarantee of tomorrow. So accumulated riches are meaningless. What you eat and drink today and the joy you get from the work you do today are your real possessions. Now it looks like a very hedonistic, epicureanistic conclusion, but it is not. Whatever riches can give has to be enjoyed today. That's your real possession. That only gives meaning. Now think of it the other way. If actually the food you ate and the drink you drank and the work you did and the joy you derived from it are the true riches, I mean, if those are the true possessions that you really have as on today, what is the meaning of riches? See, that's why the critic says it's meaningless. Riches are meaningless. Why he says that if you are able to enjoy all this, there is a hand of God in it, is because there are people who have food and drink and a lot of work, but no joy in it. Either because of circumstances or because they have lost their health on their way to gaining the wealth. So enjoying it every day of your life is also a gift from God. It's interesting that he brings God in chapter number 2. And this is the last message of today. Verse number 26. He says that for God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy to a man who is good in his sight, but to the sinner he gives the work of gathering and collecting, that he may give it to him who is good before God. This also is vanity and grasping for the wind. Please God to enjoy the eating, drinking and the joy in the hard work. God gives it to you. If you continue to please God, you will be able to enjoy it. But if you are a sinner, whatever you have will also be given to somebody else who pleases God. This is the caveat with which he ends. He says, all this is so meaningless. And actually in verse number 17 he says, I hated life because the work that was done under the sun was distressing to me, for all is vanity and a grasping for the wind. There is no true meaning if we get into the depths of the activities and things that we really do on this planet. There is no sense of fulfillment in it. And the coronavirus has only highlighted the lack of meaning in a lot of activities we do. We run like rats in corporates, doing this, doing that. When it comes to a life-threatening situation, nothing matters. What matters is whether you are able to walk, whether you are able to eat, whether you are able to manage the very essentials of life, whether you have your dear ones around you. What use is the money in the bank when all you need is dal and rice? All the goods and wares that the market today produces, be it the 80-inch TV or the 1 lakh rupee phone, who wants it? Which of those shops are open? Where is the demand for it? Is anybody writing to the government, please open these shops because we need these things? No, we don't need all these things. Money is useless because all the money we will ever need is to stay alive, which means we need money only to eat and drink and whatever work we do to enjoy from it. I hope there were a lot of insights that came out of chapter number 2. I really enjoyed this chapter. I hope we will continue onwards for the remaining 10 chapters. May God bless you.